so honored that I'm a keynote speaker. I really didn't think this would ever happen. And I remember very well, 12 years ago, I was here and I was bothering the keynote speaker and I was complaining about how bad the packaging ecosystem was for Python. And it was bad. You know, I think it was before Wheels even existed. And he said, hey, you should look at Docker. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is cool. So I really dived deep into Docker. And I think that advice, in the end, gave me a PhD in astrophysics. So I'll get to that later. But I still think that keynote, I forgot his name, but I hope there will be a young boy here that also does something awesome with my story. So I want to start this talk with a bit of a personal story, and it's about the record store of my parents. So I was born in Beverwijk, a boring city in the Netherlands, in North Holland, and my parents had a record store there. My dad took this store over from his dad. He founded the store in about 1950, and they started just after the war. People were quite poor, and records were expensive, so they would rent out records and record players. So that slowly transformed into selling records, and my dad took over the store, and then later in the 70s and the 80s, they started selling CDs and cassette tapes and that kind of stuff. So it was a social meeting spot. It was like a bar, right? So it has a social function. People would come there, talk about music, share their passion, and you could go there. And in the time of the CD, there was a bar with telephones, so you could request a specific song, and my dad would put the CD in the CD player. You could listen on the telephone to the song. You had a little button. You could go to the next, and then if you liked it, you bought the CD. So it was a social meeting spot, and famous artists would come, and they would sign your record. And it was a lucrative business. It went quite well. And it was not only my grandpa who started a music store, it was also his brother. So he started a record store in Amsterdam, and it's called Concerto. And Concerto is still there. It's the oldest record store in the Netherlands that's still alive. And coincidentally, I'm named after him. So if you Google my name, you'll find articles about how I founded Concerto in 1955. So the world changed around 2000. Then Napster came along, and people started downloading music. CD burners became commercially available and affordable. And after Napster came LimeWire, and illegal downloading became normal. So I was in high school back then, and I remember quite well that I had like classmates like, oh, your dad is a thief. These CDs are so expensive, and I can just download it. And other kids would just come into the shop and they would steal the covers from the CDs so they can put them in the copied things that they downloaded on the internet. So, I mean, to be fair, I was the biggest copier also. I mean, I'm admitting on a crime. I had a shop below my house with thousands of CDs. So I was the biggest bootlegger myself. So, but yeah, within a couple of years, the whole business turned around, and from a very busy shop, it turned into an empty shop. So this is me with my child last year in front of the empty shop. It's a bit dramatic, but actually my parents turned out quite well. They quit their music business in around 2008, and they started renting out the property. And they didn't realize this was actually way more lucrative than selling CDs. So, especially now in the real estate crisis, I mean, don't feel sorry for my parents. They're fine. So, but yeah, still sad, right? Like there's something missing there, and that will never come back, or not in the form that it was. So, Concerto still exists. So whenever you're in Amsterdam, you're a record lover, go pay them a visit. They also sell books, I think, now, and they have a bar. So nice place to hang out. So I'm going to change gear a bit here, but I will get back to this later. So now I want to talk about astronomy. So I already mentioned that a bit. So when I left Beverwijk, I moved to Amsterdam, and I started studying software engineering. And afterwards, I studied artificial intelligence. And this was around 2010. This was pre-deep learning, and I had a graduation project called Sonic Gesture, and here I translated hand movement, hand signs into MIDI for making music. And this was all manual labor with like color, space, forgot the terminology even, and a support vector machine, like old school machine learning stuff that's all completely useless now. So I finished that, and by some strange coincidence, I ended up in South Africa, where I got involved with a team calibrating radio telescopes. So there's a big telescope being built in South Africa called the Square Kilometer Array. And I had the honor to work in the calibration team there to work on data reduction pipelines. And so here I started to introduce containers. And this was back then absolutely novel technology. Scientists had such big problems getting their software deployed in these big clusters. And it's old, crappy scientific software, weird dependencies. It was always a pain to install, and containerization really solved that problem. So I introduced that in my group, and they ate it like candy. And so then we started thinking a bit further, like maybe we can do more complex graph-based computation, scheduling. And so I started doing research on that, and I discovered Luigi, this Python framework for doing graph-based problem modeling. Coincidentally, that's made by Spotify. And so I made up a couple of papers about that, gave a couple of talks. I was also here twice. So I was, first time I was here, I was working for a project on LOFAR, which is the low frequency array here in the Netherlands. It's also a radio telescope. And in 2016, I presented my paper, CLICO, the scientific compute container format. But while I was doing all these things, there was this company in Stockholm that was just awesome, right? So this is Spotify. So it was founded in 2006 and launched in 2008. And I was always a big fan because suddenly there was this program that you could just download for free, and you could stream music for free in the beginning. And it was very weird. Like, is this legal? Is it illegal? So, but suddenly there was no more need to download all these songs. You could just stream it. And they had this very cool cross-platform player that was fast and small and minimal, and everything just worked, and it was quick. And the blog posts they posted were amazing and very cool. And so I was a big fan of this company. And suddenly there was no more need for downloading all this stuff. So I always wanted to work there, I think. But you know, I was busy with other things. And actually I never thought I could work there. I was like, no, those people are way too smart. And until a friend of mine got a job there, old classmate of mine. And I was like, how do you do that? I was like, well, you just apply. So, he said, look, if you apply, I'll write you a reference, so that makes it easier. So I applied for 5 positions, 4 machine learning ones, and then 1 system engineering position. And I got the system engineering position. It was very weird. Well, I thought I was a data engineer or a machine learning engineer, but apparently Spotify thinks I'm a system engineer. So suddenly I was, operating big clusters of load balancers and building infrastructure at Spotify. And I've never learned as much as in the last 4 years. So, and I mean, it's such a weird, a dystopian thing almost. You're like, the whole application was online, and I got the job, and I still couldn't believe it. And suddenly you get this laptop in the mail, and you open your laptop, yeah, I work at Spotify. It was just a very strange experience. But here, 4 years later, I'm still here. But this is a Python conference, so let's talk a bit about Python. So in the beginning of Spotify, it's a bit hard to figure it all out because there was not really Git yet, and most people that worked there in the beginning are sitting on an island with a cocktail now, right? So there were very few people that are still walking around from the early days. But I found a couple, and they explained me a little bit what happened, and they vetted this presentation also. And they said it all began with Java 5, and but everybody hated it. It was very painful, and so John in Swedish, he still works at Spotify, and 15 years ago he gave a talk about EuroPython about how everybody just hated Java, and they were looking for something else, something that not everybody hated, and they landed at Python. So Python, it was not the obvious choice, but it was just like, nobody really hates it, so let's use this. So, and by 2013, a couple of years later, they already had 100 services, or microservices maybe, in modern terminology, and 80% of that was Python. So the desktop was still written in C++, but the backend is, majority was Python. And the philosophy was really just like, you know, if we like working with it and it works, then why not? So everything was twisted back then. So, and I was like, oh, twisted. That's a long time ago. There was this very popular networking framework, async, callback based, and so everything was twisted. And at some point, they ran into performance issues with twisted. So they introduced gEvent and greenlet, and that worked for them up to a certain point. So all the I/O based problems were sort of solved there. You know, you can scale with this technology, but you're dealing with music, you're dealing with data, and I mean, a lot of data back then. You know, and Python is CPU bound because of the GIL. So there's all kind of ways to work around that, but especially back then, no, this is still Python 2. Especially, it's hard. I mean, every time you utilize multi-process, you do a copy of your program, and you run out of memory. So suddenly you're memory bound, and also, you know, Python 2 was not really type safe. There were hacks around it with comments, with types and things like that, but just ugly and hacky. And so they tried working around all this stuff with Cython, but yeah, why then not just write C and C++? So the sort of front-end load balancer called access point, they completely rewrote it in C++. And fun fact is that thing is still alive today, and I'm one of the people maintaining this C++ monster from 2010. So, but we're deprecating it. We're vibe coding it away with Java. So, but really, yeah, this is old Python 2, and a lot of things that we take for granted now, it was just not available back then. It was very hacky. So they migrated away. So, and they went back to Java. And there's multiple reasons why they chose Java, and I think mostly it was just a cultural thing. They hired a lot of people coming from Oracle, and these were experts in Java, and they knew how to get the maximum out of Java. So Java, this was also around Java 7 was released, and it was just a very different platform, which performed way better than 5. And so yeah, Java it is. But Python never went away. So it just kept on growing, but just not as fast as Java. And especially when machine learning became a thing, because in the beginning there were no recommendations and things like that. The daily, your weekly playlist is something really recently new. And that's where Python again comes in the story. So everything on the hot path, if you press pray or skip or whatever, seek, that goes through Java services. But anything asynchronous or not on the hot path is typically touches Python. So the migration didn't kill Python, but Python started to excel in different corners. So Python today at Spotify. I think it's useful to explain a little bit what the golden path have. We have something called the golden path. Like developers have or had a lot of freedom, and they constructed a manual describing the technology you should use to have the least resistance within the company, which is Java and a couple of libraries that you should use. And if you use this protocol, it nicely integrates with other services, and you get the most support from other teams, and also automated security updates and that kind of stuff. So, but if you use machine learning models, data processing, you have more freedom, and then Python is the obvious choice. But anything, again, on the hot path with the backend is supposed to be Java. So I did a bit of number crunching, and we have about 180,000 Python files across 7,500 repositories. We have our own GitHub Enterprise that we run. According to the metrics, we have 950 Python services and a lot of libraries. We run 30,000 daily workflows, all Luigi and Flyte, crunching numbers and making recommendations, and there's still quite some number of fast API repositories, 332. So that's basically the Python golden path. Like if you want to run a Python service within Spotify, then you really have to then use fast API. And we still have a lot of Luigi also. Luigi is really old. We're deprecating it away, but it's still the most used platform within the company. But we're moving to Flyte, which is made by Lyft. Yeah. So it's not a golden path, but it's definitely everywhere. So Luigi is, I mean, I mentioned it before, it's this orchestration tool where you can build these DAGs, these directed acyclic graphs, and that way sort of split up your complex computation and schedule it in clusters. And these pipelines can depend on each other, and you can have different data products. A team produces this, and when they're done, then this team's pipeline runs. And then so it's layers and layers of pipelines. We also have Hendrix. So Hendrix is unfortunately not open source. So Luigi is open source. I forgot to mention that. I think so. It has 18,700 stars. It's the most starred GitHub repository we have. So it's quite popular, or it used to be quite popular. And then we have Hendrix. Unfortunately, that's not open source, but that's basically our internal machine learning scheduling platform. And I must say I'm not familiar with it. I'm not a machine learning engineer. I'm a system engineer. So, but it's built on Ray, and it's distributed. It's a distributed computing library. Ray is a distributed computing library, and everything machine learning basically happens with Hendrix. And the primary primitive is PyTorch object. So, but a lot of services make use of Hendrix, like the new Discover Weekly and the AI DJ that everybody loves. And so another one that's fun is the Pedalboard. So Pedalboard is a Python library that is open source. And the problem it's trying to solve is that a lot of data scientists try to write their own data manipulation routines, and that was slow and naive, and they were calling FFmpeg. And so a lot of CPU cycles were wasted there, and it was all a bit messy. So there was a need to have a sort of uniform library to assist with that and do all kind of mutations on audio. So then we made Pedalboard, which is a thin wrapper around Juice, is it thin? Well, Juice. So Juice is a C++ library for doing audio manipulation, and Pedalboard is basically a Pythonic API around Juice. So, and Juice enables you to also load in all kind of plugins, like VST plugins for Steinberg audio, and Apple is also all kind of audio unit plugins. So all these plugins you can load in, and it's a very Pythonic way to quickly manipulate audio and play with it. Also quite popular, it has 5,500 stars. So we also have Annoy and Voyager. Annoy is a probabilistic nearest neighbor implementation in Python, and for about 10 years that powered the Discover Weekly recommendations, where you're being clustered with multiple people, and then the recommendation is based on that. So that's not how it works anymore, but that's how it used to work. But again, it was not fast enough, so they had to replace with something else, which is Voyager, Java-based, and I think that's still operational. So, but both are open source, so if you need something like that, go play with it. And last but not least, we have Backstage. So people ask me, what is Backstage? I'm like, yeah, what is Backstage? It's like everything GitHub is not that you need in a big organization. Like you have all your technical documentation in one place. It has sort of a browser for your colleagues, and who is their boss and who is their boss, and all kind of little features that are just useful to have in an organization. So it's really the landing page for most of the work we do. But the more interesting part is the data visualization part, and that is unfortunately not open source, but basically it's just a sort of front end to all these data products that I just described, that generated by Luigi, where you have these graphs and they produce a data product, even a derivative from that that goes into another pipeline. So it's a visualization of this whole chain of data. And but again, that is mostly Python, but unfortunately it's not open source. I don't know why, but so now I want to move to open source in general, and there's a bit of an interesting trend that Spotify is really, I think was an early mover where they needed to do something and then it just didn't exist. So for example, they in the beginning they had all this Python and they had a lot of computers. How do you properly install all this software? And what they made was a Debian helper, helper virtual env, and so everything is running Debian. And so if you had a Python application, that would just make a virtual env, install the libraries in there, bundle that with the source code, put that in a Debian package, and put that in an internal Debian repository, and then slowly roll that out over all the services. So, and that worked great. I mean, it's still operational. Nobody uses it anymore because everybody's using Docker. But it was a great solution back then. So, same with Hermes. Nobody knows about Hermes. But this is our internal protocol. Developers back then looked at HTTP and they were like, oh, this sucks. It's too slow. And we're talking about 1.1. It's slow. You need to have a connection for every request. So what they took was they just took HTTP, the specification, and they forked it and they added all those features. Very similar to HTTP 2, but then just slightly different. So, which helped them a lot at that point, but also then you have this arbitrary protocol running in your whole company. So up until today, we're still migrating to gRPC. So gRPC is a protocol developed for backend-to-backend communication by Google and solves a lot of the problems that Hermes tries to solve. So we have the same with Boink. We needed a sort of protocol description language that also generates source code for you. Genius idea. Nobody ever did this kind of stuff. They created it themselves. They made Boink. That is basically practically replaced by Protobuf, made by Google. Again, the same with Helios. So they started to adopt containers at some point, but Docker Compose was not really scratching that itch, so they needed something better, how to manage lifespan cycles for containers. So they built their own orchestration platform, Helios. And coincidentally, Helios was announced on the same conference as Kubernetes. It was a Docker conference. And even Helios was just before Kubernetes. For a while, there was these two container platform orchestration thing, but obviously Kubernetes won. And I think it's now 2 years that we shut down the last Helios cluster. So we're also running on Kubernetes now. So it's a bit of a pattern. Invent it, open source it, and then watch the rest of the industry migrate to something else. And then we're stuck with our own solution. So it's hard to compete with Google, for example. So the disruption loop. So just circle back to the beginning. In February, there was an article published by TechCrunch saying, like, Spotify says that the best developers haven't written a line of code since December thanks to AI. And there was a bit of controversy about that here and there. People didn't believe it, or they found it stupid, and also internally it's like, oh, am I a best developer or not? But I mean, we're really encouraged to be fully agentic. And I mean, this is a screenshot of me working, and this is how I work. I think I would have more sessions if my screen was wider. So I typically have 6, 7 sessions open per project, and I'm just constantly using AI. So I would say, I mean, I think it's true, or at least I'm not saying I'm the best developer, but yes, this is the way I work. So I use it everywhere all the time, and I really didn't touch an editor in about 6 months now. So things really started to accelerate when we enabled MCP for everything. We now have MCP for Slack in the last 2 months, and I can just do massive analysis on support threads. Like we have internal channels where we give support to other teams, and I can just do like, okay, what are the most common questions in the last 6 months, and then make an abstract of that and feed that context in our bot, so people, if they come into our channel, then we answer that question, and it works, and it's like, oh, thanks, bot, and so we have much less work already there. So it really changed my life. My life is completely changed. So I came back from parental leave after 6 months of parental leave. Also, thank you, Spotify, greatest gift in my life. Came back around February, March, and suddenly you're in this AI world, and like, whoa. In the beginning, I was sad. I was depressed. I thought, like, I'm a doctor in astrophysics. I worked for 27 years. All these things that I studied are absolutely pointless now. Everybody with a 200 euro Claude Max account can do the same thing as I can. But there's really a next level where you get. So if you have, you use MCP for everything. Really, it's about integrating all these tools with the existing infrastructure, but also having infinite tokens helps. So we have a lot of tokens, and that. Sorry, 200 euro Claude people. But yeah, the art of software engineering is changing per day. Like, we're looking at it, and it's sad, and it's amazing, and but it's just super powerful. I really feel like I can do 10 times more, or that I'm an 18-year-old again. So, and it also means that we can do more with less people. So I don't know what's going to mean long-term for Spotify. For now, everything looks good for everyone. So, but AI it is. So where will this go? I don't know. So the same is about open source project and managing them. I don't know, like 10 years ago, if you had a big software project, and you had a contributor, and he or she wanted to have a specific feature implemented, there was disagreement, you walk away angry, you fork the project, you try to bring the community with, and there's drama, and there was a big problem in open source, this kind of stuff. And I think that really changed now. Using AI, all the work in software, has lost a lot of value. So forking becomes much lower friction. So that whole dynamic changes. So forking becomes trivial, and also like up to, I would say, half a year ago in Spotify, if we look around and look at software, and it's like, oh, shall we use this? And like, well, let's look if the maintainer is a good guy, and if there's a nice community, and maybe we adopt it, because with that, you don't want to have the risk to start using open source software that has pull request open for 6 months. So that really changed. Like, if now a piece of software becomes unhealthy, we can just fork it internally. But what we absolutely wanted to avoid, but I mean, still now it's so easy. We can just fork it and have Claude maintain the code, and it's not that expensive. So, and it also goes the other way around, right? So the incentive to open source things changed, because we don't really need those other people anymore. You're actually more at risk that people find security vulnerabilities in your code. So I mean, it's very short, but I sort of see friction there, and I think it's going to change a lot for open source. But I don't know. It's early days, so maybe I'm wrong. But I think history rhymes, right? My parents had a record store for 42 years. Had to shut it down, unfortunately, but they reinvented themselves. And the music industry was in a massive panic. It was massively disrupted, but companies like Spotify came along and completely reinvented the music industry. And the music industry is bigger than ever, and there's more people paying money for music than ever. Like, the average person back in the day would buy a CD here and there, but now everybody is paying for a subscription. It's a very different revenue model. So the same technical force is disrupting our industry as a software engineer. So, but I think disruption doesn't mean destruction in this case. So but you're forced to reinvent yourself, and I think I did. So is it still worth having a language-specific conference? I mean, I made these slides before the announcement that actually this is the last one. So, so I was like, oh yeah, let's keep it going. But yeah, I already see it now. Like, I love Python. My company is called Pythonic. But if something needs to run in a browser, it needs to be fast and cross-platform, and it needs to be easily installed, then I use Rust. And I mean, I'm not fluent in Rust, but Claude is, and I'm fluent enough to understand that Claude doesn't generate weird stuff. So, and also, I mean, this is the end of the last conference, but the room is full, right? Like, there's a lot of people here. So, so yes, 20 years of Python at Spotify. The music found a way, and I'm quite sure all coders and their code will do also. So, thank you very much.